Hello, everyone, and welcome to Drafting Your 2025 ASR and Other Clery Compliance Matters. I'm Haley Hansen, and I'm going to go through our housekeeping for today. So I am the leader of the higher education team here at Husch Blackwell, and I have the incomparable Ellen Armentrout with me today, and we are going to be your presenters. So let's talk about what you have on your audience console, just to make sure you know where everything is today if you need any help. At the bottom of your console, there are multiple application icons for your use during the program. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to submit them via the question box. We try to answer the questions, but Ellen did such an amazing job with your materials today that we have 71 slides in 60 minutes. So it's possible we might not get to every question. Also, if you would like a copy of the slides, if you go to the PDF, there's a PDF in the program material folder, which is at the bottom of your audience console as well. And this program has been approved for continuing legal education hours. For live attendees, make sure to report your hours by clicking on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen, and then you will receive a certificate of attendance with the course number and your particular state as well. You'll also receive a copy of the recording of the webinar today in case there was anyone from your team at your institution that missed it and that would benefit from it as well. Towards the end of the program, be sure to click our short survey. We love to have all of your feedback of ways we can improve and specifically topics for the next webinars as well. So that's all for the housekeeping items. Let's go ahead and start with our program. So as I said, joining me today is Ellen Armentrout. Ellen has been an attorney in our higher education group for many years, and prior to joining, Ellen worked for 15 years in the general counsel's office at Michigan State University. During her tenure at the firm, Ellen has done a lot of different types of work, but she is really focused on Clery, and she is our go-to person and all questions Clery. So we are really very blessed to have Ellen with us today, and she will be taking over about halfway through because she does a lot when it comes to VAWA, and she is very, very knowledgeable about the Stop Campus Hazing Act, which is really important with your ASRs this year as well. So happy to have Ellen. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So our agenda is robust. We're going to talk about background, very, very quickly. So hopefully a lot of you understand your Clery compliance requirements, and then we're going to talk about the ASR and what we see regarding policy statements that are missing. A lot of people are, fairly good about collecting and counting their crimes, but a lot of times we see policy statements missing. So we'll talk about general policy statements, drug and alcohol, and then I'll hand it over to Ellen to talk about the Violence Against Women Act, hazing, and then we'll talk at the end about multiple campuses and statistical errors that we see that happen as well. So just some background. Obviously, as we know it, the Clery Act has been around since 1990. The name changed officially to the Janine Clery Disclosure of Campus Security Policy and Campus Crime Statistics Act in 2008. But it was really an effort by Janine Clery's parents after she was raped and murdered in her dorm room at Lehigh University to go on a crusade to make sure that crimes were published and available and that families would know how safe their college campuses are. And so we saw the last kind of reiteration of amendments to the Clery Act in 2013 regarding the Violence Against Women Act. And again, Ellen's going to do a deep dive in that. And then we also saw this past year passed the Stop Campus Hazing Act, which again is part of the Clery Act. And so as we see all of this, it's really important to understand where we are. Now, one of the things that we just need to talk about is the Clery Handbook. So as you know, during the first Trump administration, the Clery Handbook was revoked essentially, but you could still use it as a safe harbor, and it was then replaced with the FSA appendix. And so we've had a lot of confusion because some of the things within the actual laws themselves are now out of date, including Ellen and I were just talking about this, the FBI definitions in a few areas. And so Ellen will talk about that in the VAWA area. But it's important to understand that, we have the laws themselves, and then we have the regulations, which I talked about on the earlier screen with the Clery Act. Those have the force and effect of law. And then we have what we call sub-regulatory guidance, which includes anything that the Department of Education puts out in terms of a Dear Colleague letter or a handbook, but it's still able to have to be used as a safe harbor. And what we've seen too is during the first Trump administration, they changed the fines and how the fines would work. And so the fines ratchet up each year. And now we're at a little over $70,000 per violation. So you can imagine if you get reviewed regarding Clery, the fines have ratcheted up. And that really, during the Obama administration, just to say what a big change that's been, that had been the first time that they had raised the fines in many years, and they were up to $35,000 per violation. So we really increased the fines, and they'll keep increasing every single year. It'll just keep going up. So what are our overreaching requirements? Obviously, to collect and classify reports of crimes and publish your annual security report. And that must be done on or before October 1st of each year. And you'll be publishing your statistics for the calendar year. So on October 1st of 2025, the most up-to-date calendar year will have ended December 31st, 2024. And so it goes on the calendar year, and you publish 3 consecutive years. Hopefully everybody knows that. And then you also provide your crime statistics to Ed via the online survey. And a lot of institutions get into trouble sometimes when what they provided in the online survey doesn't match with their ASRs. So be very careful of that as you're moving forward. You also have to issue timely warnings and emergency notifications, and then comply with the VAWA requirements. And since Ellen's going to do a deep dive, I will leave that to her. Institutions with on-campus student housing must also include, and I'm going to cover this towards the end, policies regarding missing students and fire safety, including making sure that your fire safety information is published as well, and have a daily crime log. Okay, so again, very, very short, overall requirements. And now let's really dive into the ASR and what you have to have within your ASR. So the annual security report, again, has to have the past 3 calendar years of crime statistics and all current policy statements. So even though the Stop Campus Hazing Act wasn't in effect for the years that you will be publishing in these past 3 years, your policy statements are still required in this year's ASR. So that gives you an example of it's your current policy statements. So some schools last year had to update their policy with the Biden Title IX changes to their Title IX policies. And now you need to revert back to your policy statements or, whatever you had decided that comply with the 2020 regulations from the first Trump administration. And so it's important to understand that your current policy statements that must be published. And you also must provide your ASR to all current and prospective students and employees. And that's important because sometimes we get really caught up in giving it to our current students and we forget about prospective students and employees. So if you choose to provide your ASR through some sort of posting method and that you're going to, send an email that links it, you've got to have number one, a URL to where the report is actually posted, and you've got to have an email that provides a description of what's in it. So it can't just say, here's our 2025 ASR, and that's compliant. That isn't compliant. And if you look at some of the finding letters with the department, they will tell you that isn't compliant. You actually have to summarize, give a brief summary of what is actually in the report as well, and then a statement of how to obtain a paper copy. Note that you may not use an intranet site to make these disclosures because that doesn't that doesn't disclose it to prospective students and prospective employees that are applying for jobs at the institutions. So that brings us to our first poll question. So on July 1st, 2025, XYZ University realizes that it misreported a statistic in its October 1st, 2024 ASR. How should the XYZ University respond? A, correct the ASR and post it on the internet site as soon as possible. B, send an email to the campus community explaining the change with a copy or link to the corrected ASR. C, publish the 2025 ASR early with the corrected statistic, which then had no explanation whatsoever. Or D, none of the above. So I've got a few of you. How do you respond to this? And we got a question that came in as what qualifies as a summary that I just talked about of the report? Will one sentence suffice? No, it will not suffice. That's exactly what I was talking about. You have to actually say what's in it. And so several paragraphs, you need to have several paragraphs in there. All right, I've got like about 36. Some of you are responding in the chat instead of, I don't know if something's going wrong, but I see your responses in the chat or the Q&A box. So we got about 50% plus some in the Q&A box that are all the right answer. So that's good. All right, here we go. So 66% of you got the right answer. Great. So send an email to the campus community explaining the change as soon as possible with the corrected ASR from 2024. So I love to see that we have a lot of you that are looking at the right thing. Okay, so correcting mistakes. If an institution makes a correction I'm sorry, I was just seeing more of these come in and on our question and answer. So the question and answer box is only for your actual questions. You should be able to click on the poll question when it comes up. So hopefully that'll work the next time for you. Corrected crime statistics must be corrected in all affected ASRs, not just not just one of them. You must go back and correct all ASRs. And so that can be very frustrating for schools because they'll have figured out that they did something wrong in an ASR in 2023, and then they need to correct it in other ASRs as well. So that's going to be really important. So the most recent ASR should reflect any new policies. And when you make a change, add a note to the ASR, making sure you explain the change. And according to the findings letters and the help desk, you must redistribute the ASRs following the procedures used to distribute the original ASR. So make sure that you're aware of those procedures. Okay, another big issue that we have is record keeping, and that you must keep all Clery related records for 3 years from the latest publication of the ASR in which they apply. So effectively, we have a 7-year records retention policy. And this example just shows how it gets to 7 years. So in January 2022, a Clery crime was reported. The statistic is included and published in 2023, 2024, and 2025, and then retained for 3 more years after that. So I think that's important to note as well. Okay, so let's move on to the general policy statements and talk a little bit about what the general policy statements need to be in the annual security report. So it's important to understand that there are requirements that you may not have. And I think this is important, and I'll give you some examples as we go through the slides. But then when they're required as a policy statement in the ASR, you need to say whether or not you do or do not have certain things. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more. But it's important to actually show that you're meeting all of the requirements set forth and what needs to be in the ASR and your current institutional policy statements. So information regarding the ASR's preparation and how to obtain a hard copy needs to be included as a policy statement. law enforcement authority and jurisdiction. This should be consistent throughout the ASR and pertain to all campus locations. So making sure it's clear of where that jurisdiction is. Your working relationship. So do you have a memorandum of understanding? This is what I was talking about earlier. If you don't, you need to write, there is no memorandum of understanding with local law enforcement. That's fine. You don't have to have one, but you have to say what your procedures are. And a lot of people miss that at times because they think, oh, if we don't have something, we'll just not include it, or not mention it. And that can be something that you could get fined for. So be aware of it. CSAs to whom to report crimes to. We recommend including 5 individuals to whom you would prefer individuals report Clery crimes to. So I think that's important to have there, and your definitions of CSAs. CSAs have been very tricky, I think, in the last few years. And Ellen, I'll have you unmute and kind of talk about this as well. We've given you the blue is all examples of statements that we've had before, and I won't go through that because you'll get a copy of the slides. But, we've saw in the Michigan State findings letter that Michigan State, after the Nassar investigations and convictions were shown that they didn't identify enough CSAs. And so we've seen, and then we kind of went back on the appendix, and the appendix is saying that we've over-identified CSAs. So we've kind of, the pendulum has swung, wouldn't you agree, Ellen? And I think it can be very confusing.
It can be very confusing, and I think you're right. And one of the things that the more recent appendix says is that the department will try to defer to institutions regarding who their CSAs are. But the regulation says that you should list the CSAs to whom you would like these crimes to be reported. So we have interpreted that to mean that the ASR itself doesn't need to include a comprehensive list of everyone you've identified as a CSA at your institution. So we think around 5 people that you would sort of like to route your campus community to is the best approach for the ASR.
I totally agree. And I think it's important to because I think a lot of people thought, well, like at Michigan State, they were saying maybe they had, over 1,000 people that would be CSAs at campus, security authorities. And so, do you have to list all of those people within? And the answer, again, I think that has been clarified, at least by the help desk. And as we've been working through once the appendix came out, exactly what Ellen said. But you also still want to have a list of who your CSAs are and make sure that you do some CSA training. And that's been a little confusing for people as well, because it's not technically required, but then we've had some findings letters from the department saying you can't be in full compliance unless you do have training, unless they understand what their obligations are to report. So, those things can be a little bit trickier. Policies that encourage prompt reporting, accurate reporting to law enforcement. Again, if necessary and if asked for by the victim, and Ellen will go into this a little bit more as well, description of procedures, if any, that encourage pastoral counselors and professional counselors, when and if they deem appropriate, to inform persons of procedures to report crimes. And so we've given you some sample language before as well, like if the university has professional counselors, and again, under their own, this is a carve out, they are not mandatory reporters, but how, if the individual wants to get information, how can that be given? And especially at times it can be given in a de-identified way if that's something that the individual is wanting to do. Again, more general policy statements, security and access to campus facilities, including student housing, is very important. One we see that's missing a lot. Also, one that we see a lot is maintenance of campus facilities, what you do to maintain, and that these 2 requirements are similar but not identical. And a lot of people just kind of mush them together and don't really answer either one. We've seen when we go through and review people's ASR, or lots of schools' ASRs. And then also a statement that describes the type and frequency of the programs that are to inform students and employees about campus safety. So this is not just the VAWA requirements of your educational programming, of your primary education programming. This is about safety and security. And so understanding what is that and how do you notify the campus of your procedures. Again, that the statement, the institution will, upon written request, disclose to alleged victim of a violent crime. When we talk about that, the report and results of disciplinary proceedings that have been conducted, and making sure, again, that you have very clearly identified that role of reporting with local law enforcement, especially if you're campus, if you have campus security or you're not local law enforcement that is, even if you are or not, it needs to be disclosed within the ASR. So I think that those policy statements at times can be a little confusing for institutions, so making sure that those are available as well. Okay, I'm going a little too slowly, so I'll pick up the pace for all of our slides. So we're now on to drug and alcohol. So your ASR must include statements regarding drug and alcohol and the possession and use of alcohol, underage drinking laws, what is the possession and use of illegal drugs, and enforcement under federal law and state law. And again, we have to comply with federal law when we're talking about drugs and alcohol under the Clery Act. And then a description of any of your education programs for students and employees. We always see it for students. We hardly ever see it for employees in the ASR. That's a big miss too, that they go through a lot of detail of the education that they do with students with drugs and alcohol, but not with your employees. So the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act requirements require annual notifications to students and employees and a biennial review. So every 2 years, you must do a review of your drug and alcohol abuse prevention programming. This has been a big miss that we've seen with a lot of institutions. And when you get, when you're notified that you're going to have a federal financial aid audit or review, or you're going to have a Clery audit. And again, under those federal financial aid reviews, there's a portion of it that goes through Clery as well that will look through this. They ask to see your last, I think it's 2 or 3 biennial reviews because they want to see the last 6 years of what you've done. And so they will be checked, and you need to make sure that you have them, that you do them. We see a lot of turnover in student affairs sometimes. And so sometimes who was in charge of the biennial review is not there anymore. So they're not done. No one can find it. This is a very hot topic for something that is a finable offense if you don't have your biennial review. So just make sure that you are on top of this. Again, it occurs every 2 years. You need to determine the effectiveness of your drug and alcohol programs, implementation of changes that you might need to make, or different strategies that you're going to have based on what you're being provided in terms of the violations of drug and alcohol policies and laws as well. And we'll talk about that, the difference between the two. And then ensuring consistent enforcement through disciplinary sanctions. So you've got to have your dean of students, provide information and input regarding the consistency of enforcement on campus. And so that's going to be really, we also think previous guidance said that it was good to have it referenced in the ASR. We think that's best practice. I mean, if you would write in a question, tell me, where in the Code of Federal Regulations it says you have to do that. I cannot point to anything that says you have to do that. Again, just think it's best practice, and it's a good way to make sure you're talking with your team, because the ASR cannot be built in a silo, or you have to have a lot of input and a lot of help. And if you go to student affairs, then it's a good reminder to say, oh, we didn't do the biennial review last year, so guess what? You need to do it this year. I mean, it's every 2 years. So, and that's, I think, one of the reasons, just candidly, why people miss it all the time. It's because it's every 2 years. I think things that are every year, people kind of get on their checklist. Every 2 years, you haven't thought about it for a year, and so you may just, forget that it's time to do one. Okay. Enough about that. I will turn it over to you, Ellen. And I don't know, I see if we've had some questions come in. Do you want to try to answer those before you take over, or have me answer them? I haven't been reading them.
There was one question. Someone wrote in to say, what if you haven't done your biennial review before, and you're going to fix it now, you're going to start now, but what would you say if you got caught in that? To me, and Haley, you weigh in, the answer is just the truth. We haven't done it before, we're doing it now, and we will continue to do it every 2 years moving forward.
Yeah, and then I also think, just documenting what you probably have done, because there's likely almost at every campus, people do go back through and say, oh, well, we had a pretty big uptick in the number of drug and alcohol related incidents, in our freshman class this year. So what can we do to do a better job of giving some training or helping them, or are there other support mechanisms that we can provide? And so if you've done that, at least, documenting some of the things that you've done, it's not going to suffice for a biennial review, definitely, but at least it shows that you're aware that you need to move forward. But you can't go back and say, oh, here's one we kind of just drafted up, for 2 years ago. So, Ellen, I'll turn it back over to you to take over VAWA requirements.
Okay, sounds good. And one of the reasons that we're calling out the VAWA requirements and going into such detail is this is an area where we see a lot of shortcomings in compliance. People think that there are sort of easy ways to address the VAWA requirements in their ASR, for example. Well, I'll just put my Title IX policy in and we'll be good. That generally we have not found is an effective approach. So we wanted to talk in detail about the compliance points. We also wanted to say that this is another area of your ASR where it's very important that what you say in your ASR accurately reflects what your institution is doing. Sometimes people will just spell out the compliance points and list them in the ASR. And if they are not accurately reflecting what you're doing, that is a problem for compliance purposes. So we're going to start out with a poll question. You're responsible for Clery compliance at your institution. You ask your Title IX coordinator to complete the VAWA section of the ASR. Your Title IX coordinator says, I'm so busy, but I can't think of anything that's changed, to just include all the same information that we included last year, then we should be good to go. The question is, are you, in fact, good to go in that situation? So I'm going to give folks a few minutes to answer the poll questions. This is something that we see not just in the VAWA section of the ASR, and this is often what happens when things are too siloed at a university or a college, is that you'll say, well, everything's the same as it was last year, so just send out the ASR like it was before. So for VAWA, what do we think? Is that, are you good to go in that situation? And I'm going to go ahead and click. So a couple people said yes, some people said maybe, which is sort of a lawyer answer, and most people said no. And I think that the answer is generally going to be no, so I'll give you maybe. So let's talk about why that might not be the appropriate approach. So the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2013 amended the Clery statute, and it affects your campus procedures. It affects your on-campus programming, your Clery reporting, and your ASR content. And this applies to 4 categories of crimes: domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. So these are the definitions from the these are definitions. Domestic violence and dating violence are definitions that are set forth in the Clery regulations themselves. I'm not going to read them. Domestic violence is generally centered on, it presumes a marriage-like relationship or a child in common. Dating violence is a little bit more subjective, and it depends on the assertions of the person reporting the conduct, as well as some objective factors like how long there has been a relationship. Sexual assault is defined as an offense that meets the definition of rape, fondling, incest, or statutory rape as used in the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting System. So we have learned recently that the FBI has changed those definitions evolve over time. So the definition of fondling, for instance, changed pretty significantly recently. In the most recent NIBRS manual, we have gotten confirmation from the Clery Help Desk that we should continue to use the definitions that were set forth in the regulation and the appendix to the regulation, the Clery regulation from 2015. Keep that in mind. This, according at least to the Help Desk, these definitions do not, excuse me, evolve. Then stalking, also a message that something is funny here. Kaylee, can you hear me still?
Yeah, you're kind
Kaylee,
of cutting in and
me?
out a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I don't quite know what is going on there. I haven't touched anything.
Ellen, can you
hear me now?
I can hear you. Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll keep going. So there are some required VAWA policy statements that need to be included in the ASR. And we'll discuss each of these more closely as we go along. But you need to include a description of your programs and campaigns to promote awareness of the VAWA crimes. You need to include your procedures to follow if a VAWA crime has occurred. You need to include information about how the institution will protect confidentiality, and we'll go into that in a little more detail. You need to include services to victims, and victims is the terminology that is used in the Clery regulation, which is why we're using that language here. We understand that that is not always preferred language, but that is the language here because it's the regulatory language. You need to include your procedures for disciplinary action, and you need to talk about your a written statement of rights and options.
Hey, Ellen, so, before you move on, can we just go back? There's a lot of questions come through. They didn't hear you on the definitions of what you're supposed to use. Could you just go over it one more time, please? Yes. Thanks.
So the definitions at the time that the Clery regulation came out were included in an appendix to the regulations themselves, Appendix A. But the regulation also cited the Summary Reporting System manual and the NIBRS manual that were used by the FBI. The FBI has stopped using the SRS Users Manual, and the FBI in NIBRS has recently changed some definitions. For example, the definition of fondling. And so we reached out to the Clery Help Desk to say, what definitions should our institutions be using when they're categorizing their crimes and counting them for statistical purposes? And we were advised that the Department of Ed is saying use the definitions that were in place at the time the regulation came out as codified in Appendix A. When I say Appendix A, I'm not talking about the Clery appendix or the FSA appendix. I'm talking about an appendix that was published with the Clery regulations back in 2015. So I realize that is, it's kind of counterintuitive, and the information is from the help desk. So I'm not sure how authoritative it is, but that is the advice that we were given. So we recommend that people continue to do that. Programming includes providing a statement that your institution prohibits the VAWA offenses on your campus, a definition of dating violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking in the applicable jurisdiction. So this can be very confusing because the definitions that I was talking about previously, the Clery definitions, are the definitions that you use for your statistical reporting. The definitions that need to appear in your ASR, however, are the state jurisdictional definitions for those crimes. So that is a reason that you don't want to automatically say, use last year's ASR. You need to check to make sure that your state laws definitions haven't changed. So that's something you need to look out for each year when you're publishing your ASR. You need to include your definition of consent as it relates to sexual activity in the applicable jurisdiction. We recommend people also include the definition of consent at their institution, but the law requires that you include the definition of consent, if there is one, in your jurisdiction. You need to include information about safe and positive options for bystander intervention and risk reduction. And the way this is set out in the regulations is your ASR needs to say that your programming includes this information. So in addition to saying it in your ASR, it also must be true of your programming, if that makes sense. So there are two categories of VAWA programming that we think about when we think about the ASR and just VAWA programming. And generally, it's your primary programming and your ongoing programming. Your primary programming is generally given at the beginning of the school year or the beginning of hire or at the beginning of a term, and it focuses on prevention strategies. Your ongoing programming is done throughout the course of the year, and it's to broaden and deepen the initial programming that your community has received. Your ASR must also include procedures you should follow if a VAWA crime has occurred. So you need to include information about orders of protection. This was an area where the Clery handbook provided extensive guidance about what needed to be included, and it was very fulsome. The regulation says what you see on the screen right now, and so it's less demanding of what needs to be in the ASR. But it's really important that you tell the community about the possibility of obtaining this kind of protective order and what your institution will do if someone in the community has such a legal protection order, and whether your institution offers anything like a protective order. So frequently we encourage language that says, tell the Title IX coordinator and campus police if you have obtained an order of protection, and the university might issue something like a no trespass order or something like that on campus. So that's what that pertains to. You need to talk about the importance of preserving evidence. That would be like, if you were sexually assaulted, we recommend that you not take a shower and that you keep the clothes that you were wearing and perhaps bed sheets. In addition, like in a stalking situation, you would want to keep text messages, social media posts, things like that. The ASR needs to include information regarding how and to whom an alleged offense should be reported. It needs to provide information about how the institution will assist in reporting to law enforcement if the person wants that assistance, and also that there is no obligation to notify the authorities if the victim does not want to. You need to talk about, again, the rights and responsibilities regarding protective orders. You also need to talk about how confidentiality will be protected. And we understand that there is this tension between reporting requirements and protecting confidentiality, but you're able to do both of those things because you just simply can say we will abide by Clery Act reporting requirements without the inclusion of personally identifying information. And you also need to talk about how when you're providing accommodations for those involved in a VAWA crime situation, that you will keep those accommodations confidential to the extent that you can, while at the same time enabling the institution to provide the accommodations. You need to provide written notification of the services available, and you need to hit on each one of these topics here: counseling, mental health, victim advocacy, legal assistance. We see people often forgetting legal assistance. We see them forgetting immigration assistance and student financial aid. Those things need to be explicitly mentioned, and you need to provide the information for what's available on campus and what's available in the community, and then what's available at the national level as well. You must provide written notification to your campus community members who are affected about making accommodations or providing protective measures if requested and reasonably available. You have to provide those even if someone chooses not to go through your Title IX process or whatever process it is. And then we've given some examples of accommodations and protective measures here. And then you need to set forth your procedures for disciplinary action, including the steps, the timelines, how decisions are made. For example, is it a single investigator model, which we know is not allowed under Title IX, but might be available under other circumstances? How to file a complaint and how the institution decides which proceeding to use. And you need also to include in the ASR your standard of evidence use, which most of the time we see as the preponderance of the evidence. So we have another poll question here. Your Title IX policy says that allegations of dating violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking that occur within the United States are processed pursuant to that policy. A student enrolled at your institution on a study abroad trip calls the Title IX coordinator and says that she was sexually assaulted by another student enrolled at the institution while in her institution rented dorm. Also, you all may need to scroll down in order to see all the responses, the potential responses. The institution processes the allegation pursuant to its student conduct policy, since the reported conduct took place outside of the United States. Does this report implicate the ASR? First response possible is no, it's a Title IX matter. Second is yes, sexual assault is a Clery crime, so the report needs to be included as a statistic in the ASR regardless of the process used. Or yes, sexual assault is a Clery crime, so the report needs to be included as a statistic, and the student conduct process needs to be included in the ASR since it is a process used to address allegations of sexual assault. We're going to give you all a few minutes, and like I said, don't forget, you might need to scroll down on your screen to see all of the potential answers. All right, so we're at about 20%. I'd like to get us up to about 30% before I move on. Oh, look, we're over 30%. I'm going to go ahead and... So most of you have answered number 3. Yes, sexual assault is a Clery crime and needs to be included as a statistic, and your conduct process needs to be in the ASR. That is what I believe is the right answer. And I say that because the regulations say that you need to include information about any process that may be used to address allegations of dating violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. So any policy that you have at your university that might be used to cover such a claim, the processing of such a claim should be spelled out in your ASR. So for example, if you have a different process for students versus faculty, and this might not be the case. A lot of folks have consolidated their processes now under the 2020 Title IX regulations, but like I said, something that doesn't happen in the United States. You're still addressing sexual assault, so you need to include any of those policies that you might be used. We see people just including their Title IX policy and thinking that they're done, so we need to be mindful of that. So here's the language from the regulation saying each type of disciplinary proceeding. So not to beat a dead horse, I will move on from that. Your ASR also needs to include all the possible sanctions that the institution may impose. That is in the regulatory language, the word all. So we don't like using language such as we will impose the following sanctions, including but not limited to X, Y, and Z. If you know that your institution is going to possibly impose a particular sanction, you need to include that sanction in your ASR. And also you need to list a range of protective measures. Notice range, you don't have to list them all. So this is sample language. I won't read it because, like Haley said, you will have access to these materials. You also need to include a statement that students or employees who report this kind of conduct will be given written notification of their rights and options. And you need to say that they will. We've noticed a lot of schools don't say that explicitly, and that's something that should be stated explicitly. So now we're going to switch gears from BAWA to the Stop Campus Hazing Act. And I haven't looked at the questions, but I expect that we've got some, but I'm a little worried about time. Haley, do you mind if I keep going and we try to get the questions at the end?
I don't mind. You're kind of cutting in and out again, so I'm just going to answer one question with hopefully your connection will get a little bit better, which is the question that they had on this whole question was the fact that there was a rented, that the dorm was rented. And so why would that be non-campus property? And it's because you have ownership or control. So if it's rented and you have some sort of lease agreement, you're going to have some sort of ownership or control over those rented spaces in Italy, which is how we would analyze it to be non-campus property. So that's how we got there, is because there was, some sort of written agreement that you were renting that space. So hopefully your connection is a little better, Ellen, and you can take back over. Sorry.
Yes. No, that's great. Can you hear me? Is it okay now?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So as many of you know, the Stop Campus Hazing Act was signed into law by President Biden last December, and it amends the Clery Act and includes information about hazing and how hazing should be counted, how hazing incidents must be included in your statistics, and policy statements about hazing must be included in your ASR. So many states have had hazing laws for some time, not all of them, but many. And now we've got a federal law that defines hazing. That doesn't mean that your state law is no longer valid. It still is, but we just also have a federal law. And now the name of the Clery Act is the Jean Clery Campus Safety Act instead of the longer name that it had before. The Stop Campus Hazing Act defines hazing. It defines student organization in two different ways, depending on the context. It creates statistical reporting requirements. It creates policy statement requirements, creates programming requirements, not unlike VAWA, and it requires an additional report, the Campus Hazing Transparency Report. We're not going to get into the Campus Hazing Transparency Report in this webinar, but know that that is a requirement. So here's the definition of hazing, and we've done a previous webinar sort of about where the holes are in this definition, but this is the current federal definition of hazing. These are examples that are provided in the statute, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into great detail, but they do provide some idea of what the drafters had in mind. This is the definition of a student organization. So in the context of reporting your hazing statistics, it does not matter whether the organization is established or recognized by the institution. So if you have sort of an underground organization at your college that's engaging in hazing, those statistics need to be reported in your ASR as well. For the Campus Hazing Transparency Act, however, the standard is different. The student organization must be recognized or established by the institution. So the Stop Campus Hazing Act did not change anything about the existing statistical reporting requirements for the other crimes. What it did, though, is add hazing as a crime that needs to be included in your statistics. So you should have started, I hope none of you have had hazing incidents, but you should have started gathering information about reports of hazing in January of 2025, which will implicate your October 2026 ASR. And reported hazing incidents need to be included in your ASR if they occur anywhere on your Clery geography. Again, the Campus Hazing Transparency Act is not limited to your Clery geography, but for your ASR, it's any student organization, regardless of whether it's recognized or established, and it has to have occurred on your Clery geography. So this is language directly from the statute about how multiple incidents of hazing are addressed or counted. I don't think it's as clear as I would like it to be, but it does suggest that a single incident of hazing could include what we would think of as multiple behaviors as all a part of one related activity. So here is another poll question. And this is another one where it's quite long, so you'll need to scroll down to see all the potential answers. So you're talking to your VP for student conduct, and you say, I need information about our hazing prevention and awareness program. And your VP for student conduct gives you the language to use and says, the university requires all its athletes and students involved in Greek life to attend research-informed hazing prevention and awareness programs during orientation each year. The program includes information on how to report, how it will be investigated, prevention strategies, skill building, ethical leadership, strategies for building group cohesion. Is this language sufficient to meet the requirements of the Stop Campus Hazing Act? A, yes. It includes how to report, the process used, and describes prevention strategies. B is no, just saying that the training is research informed is not sufficient. C, no, that the state, local, and tribal hazing definition should be included, and the programming should also be made available to employees. And D, no, referencing athletes and Greek life isn't sufficient. Other student organizations must also participate in the programming. So we're going to give you just a minute or two to get a little bit more of a response. And I'm fully aware that this is new to all of us. So, but we've done a lot of thinking about this. So we hope we can have some helpful information. All right, I'm going to give it another minute, and then I'm going to go ahead and advance to the next slide. Most people have said that referencing athletes and Greek life isn't sufficient. Other student organizations must also participate in the programming. I think that is technically correct, but I would say that the right answer to this question is actually no, the state, local, and tribal hazing definition should be included, and the programming should be made available to employees. As odd as this sounds, I do think that that is the right answer. First of all, it is clear that you need to have your state, local, or tribal hazing laws included as a part of your programming. But the programming needs to be research informed and designed to reach the entire campus community. So it's not just limited. Now, that doesn't say it's mandatory for everybody, but it needs to be designed to reach students, faculty, and staff. So your ASR needs to include your statement of policy regarding how hazing is defined at your institution and that it is prohibited. You need to include information about how to report. You need to include the process used to investigate incidents of hazing and information on applicable state, local, or tribal laws. You also need to include information about your prevention and awareness programs. And like I said, they need to be research informed, campus-wide, and designed to reach students, staff, and faculty. And it needs to include the information that's included in your policy about how to report, what process will be used, and the relevant laws. And it needs to include prevention strategies. And these are the examples provided. So we have received a lot of questions in the last several weeks about hazing. So I wanted to talk about some of those. When do I need to have a policy and programming in place? So when the statute was passed, it gave people 6 months after the date of enactment. So June 23rd is when you should have had a hazing policy in place and hazing programming in place. Strangely, the statute also says that this section applies with respect to the annual security report for 2 years after the date of enactment. I think that's a little bit strange, and we recommend go ahead and include, like Haley said, your current hazing policy in this ASR. You have to have the policy and the programming anyway, so why wait? Put it in this ASR. What if we already have a policy for our students and fraternities and sororities? I would say that's great, but I think you need to make some additional programming that meets the requirements available to the entire campus community. Like I said, it is not mandatory. One of the questions we've got is, does it have to be mandatory for everyone? It needs to be campus-wide, which we think means it needs to be accessible to everyone. That doesn't mean you have to require everybody to take it. There's no rule that says you can't, but I don't think that the law requires that everyone undergo the training. One thing to think about is whether you'd want to wrap it into other training that you're already doing. For example, your Title IX training. What does it mean for the training to be research informed? That's a really good question. We're not exactly sure, but we think if it's based on accurate and tested information, then you should be in good shape. And there is that information available. StopCampusHazing.org, we've noticed, has a lot of good information. Can our programming consist of referring community members to an external website? I would say that could be a piece of your programming, but just referring someone to a website is not going to hit the points of like your state laws, your process for investigating, your reporting requirements and to whom to report and things like that. So we would say it is not a good idea just to refer people to an external website and call that your programming for hazing purposes. I'm going to turn it over now to Haley. I've given her a whopping 4 minutes to wrap this up.
Okay, I will go quickly. So missing students and fire safety. So if you have on-campus housing, your ASR must include a report, where to report missing students, and you need to go through your missing students policy. And it's not just your emergency contact, as we all know. So making sure that as students identify if they're living on campus, who to contact if under your missing students policies, and how immediately that is referred, and when parents will be notified under 18 or not emancipated, essentially. You also need to have your annual fire safety report. Again, it can accompany the ASR and make sure that you have a description of all of your fire safety systems, your drills, your smoking, open flames, policies, procedures, appliances, all those types of things. I have a child going off to college, and so it was interesting all the things that we can and cannot bring into a dorm room. And so I think that's important to include in all of this. And then your student training and plans, if any, for future improvement. I just want to hit a little bit the crime statistics. Anybody who's ever attended one of our trainings loves, we love these little charts that has all of our primary crime, criminal offenses, hate crimes, arrests, disciplinary referrals, VAWA, and then we've added, of course, the Stop Campus Hazing Act descriptions as well, making sure that you have your statistical analysis of the crimes that were reported, and that the disclosures are based on the year reported, not the year occurred. So people still make that mistake that, oh, this happened in a different year, but it wasn't reported until 6 months later. You need to report from the time in which you received the report, not when the incident the incident allegedly occurred. Also, again, we have 2 minutes left, so I'll just go through the slides quickly. Potential hate crimes and what they are motivated by, and then arrests and disciplinary referrals. And again, you must report statistics for violations of the law that occur in your campus, your Clery geography. So that's important to understand that they are violations of the law itself, and that you do not include violations of your institution's policies when people are referred for disciplinary action, but there's no actual violation of law. So an easy example is a student who's 21, but you have a policy regarding no drinking in your dorms, and they are referred for disciplinary action because they were drinking in their dorm, and they are 21 years old. Okay. And we've just given you, per the regulation, what is a referral for campus disciplinary action and per the handbook, just so you could kind of see the differences and understand what they're really looking for. I won't read those to you, but it's important to understand as you look at those arrests for violations of the law versus disciplinary referrals. We always get a lot of questions from multiple campuses. So here's the most important thing I'm going to tell you. If you have multiple campuses, you must meet all the regulatory requirements, including all the policy statements, not just your tabular, calculation of crimes for each separate campus. And so it's really important that you understand that these separate campuses have to have their own statements, and maybe in a different, some of them are in different states. So they may have different state laws that you have to include. Those are all really important. You may have different policies that are from your main campus to other campuses as well, of how security procedures are, whether or not they even have on-campus housing at some of the other campuses that we have. All those types of things need to be included. So it's okay to include it all in one big document if you want to, but it's easier to show that you met all the requirements if you have separate documents for separate campuses. It's totally up to you. If you love the way it looks to have one big, huge document, that's okay too. But there's no requirement that says you can't do that, but it's easy to overlook things. So just make sure that, again, each campus is meeting every regulatory requirement as you move forward. All right. I know we've had a lot of questions. One of them that we had at the beginning, Ellen, was, do we have a checklist? We have not done a checklist for all of this because there's nuance to some of this as well. And so it's not very helpful. But what we have done is we have our CCT product, which is the Clery Compliance Toolset, which I thought we had a slide in here, Ellen. Is it not in here? Okay, well, if you have questions,
Anastasia's going to reach out to people and tell them about it. She's going to follow up this with a
okay,
email.
All right. But that does make sure that, again, you're meeting all the requirements. So if you have any interest in that, connect with Anastasia from our team. And we're already 2 minutes over, but are there any other questions, Ellen, you think we need to answer for the group?
Several people had questions about the hazing definitions, and we talked about that, and we can provide that Appendix A to folks. That is not difficult. So
we'll follow up with that. And the slides are shared, as I said at the beginning of the program. The slides are in. If you actually go to the bottom of your audience console, you'll see the slides that you can download, and then you'll get a copy of the recording tomorrow. The slides are in the program materials folder. So if you look on that, you'll get that at the bottom. So Ellen, as always, you're the guru. I appreciate your help today. Thank you all for attending our webinar. We do hope the information was helpful. As a reminder, the program has been approved if you're an attorney for continuing legal education hours. So make sure you report on the CEU icon at the bottom of your screen so you can report your hours, and you'll get a recording of this. And also, if you have a minute and you can complete the survey, that would be wonderful as well. So this concludes our webinar. Thank you so much for attending and for all of your participation. We really appreciate it. Have a good day.